Hello and welcome to the Giving Voice to Depression podcast, brought to you by Recovery.com, the best place to find mental health and addiction treatment for anyone, anywhere.
Each week, we profile a guest who shares openly about their mental health journey. They share because they understand that when people don't talk about their depression or other mental health conditions, those of us who do struggle with them can feel like we're the only ones, that there's something wrong with us and that no one understands. We understand.
I'm Terry McGuire, the creator and co-host of this podcast. You have my promise that we'll keep it real here. Depression is real, and we're not going to sugarcoat our discussions about it.
Hope is also real, and you'll get a dose of that here too. I'm Carly McCollow, a licensed social worker and educator, and Terry's daughter. We've both experienced depression and also support loved ones struggling with it. We're here to normalize talking about depression and mental health in our communities, as well as our families.
And to share real-world tested strategies that have worked for other people who have walked similar paths. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Carly.
Hi, Mom.
So we'd guess that if you told your family's story from a mental health perspective, it might include depression, anxiety, or substance use.
But it's unlikely to also include 2 sibling deaths by suicide, schizophrenia, and multiple cases of bipolar disorder, all framed with deep love, humor, and empathy. Today, we're talking with Meg Kissinger, an investigative journalist whose work focused on the U.S. mental health system. She's also the author of the powerful memoir, While You Were Out, an intimate family portrait of mental illness in an era of silence.
In this episode, produced for Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month, Meg shares what it's like to lose loved ones to suicide, to navigate a mental health system that often fails us, and to keep showing up for joy, even in the darkest times.
Here now is Meg Kissinger, giving her voice to depression.
So you have a powerfully unique perspective from your own lived experience with your family, and then having been a Pulitzer Prize finalist reporter who really dug into the mental health system or the, system in this country.
Right.
And I'm wondering what you have come to understand that you really wish the world did about mental illness.
My number one wish is that people would see people living with serious mental illness as human beings and not discriminate against them, not consider them to be a burden, and not consider them to have caused their mental illness through some kind of character flaw or bad parenting, not a moral failing. It's an illness that affects people who need help. And not to put the burden on them to prove that they are worthy of our care and our love and our concern.
And we use the word stigma all the time, but it really is discrimination.
Yes, I'm so glad that you are bringing up this distinction, Terry. So I steal this from a guy by the name of Thomas Insel, who was the director of the National Institute of Mental Health. Stigma, comes from the word stigmata. And the suggestion is very subtle, but the suggestion is that people living with mental illness are marked, which in some ways, of course, they are. They're treated very differently. But I think where you can kind of really get people to change the way they think about those folks is when you shuffle that or calibrate that view into discrimination. And so which ways do we deny people their full dignity and their full humanity? That shifts the spotlight then on the people who are doing that injustice. Yeah. And then we're more likely to respond to that and insist on better treatment.
Good. So let's change from the macro to the micro here and talk about growing up.
Sure.
You kind of had it all. Like if we're going to talk about mental illness, your family is a pretty good microcosm with which to do that.
Yeah, we're one-stop shopping at the Kissinger family. As the 4th kid in a family of 8 kids, we were born within, bang, 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 the old school Irish Catholic way.
Yeah.
And my mother struggled with depression. and anxiety. Of course, we didn't know those were words that were never spoken in our house. And we were never like sat down and told that. It's just what we observed. So it took a long time to kind of suss out like what's going on. And why is it when I come bounding down the stairs, when I'm 6 years old looking for cream of wheat, it's my grandmother at the stove and not my mother because she is mysteriously gone and they won't tell me where she is or why. And then of course, your imagination runs wild and you think, what did I do to make my mother go away? So that was just how I was raised. And my father had what we now know to be bipolar. Again, words never spoken in our house, but just erratic behavior, not knowing from 1 minute really to the next. And then along as we grew up, one by one, many of us, felled by one form. Bipolar is the biggie in our family. We kind of have a corner in the market on bipolar. But in some more, not everybody, but many, and some more involved than others. And then, as I mentioned before, 2 ended up taking their own lives. So yeah, we had a big full dose of it.
When discussing her family, Meg always makes the point that in addition to mental illness, there were also big, full doses of love, humor, and fun.
But I'll tell you something, Terry, this sounds so weird, but it's very true. I feel like I had a great childhood. And I know that sounds crazy, but no pun intended. But I really enjoyed our family life. My brothers and sisters and I were very close. We care and we love each other very much. Our neighborhood was a blast. I mean, we had a lot of fun at our house. So as a kid, we kind of didn't know what we were going through. And it wasn't really only later as, we got increasingly more dinged up by it that I came to realize like, whoa, this family has a heaping helping of what a lot of families go through.
While heaping in nature, Meg says at the time she did not realize how out of the ordinary her family's experiences were. It was just what she knew.
Nancy had suffered from very serious depression. She had a mishmash of diagnoses. Back in the day, it's not like they're much better now, but mental illness is often diagnosed as a cluster of symptoms, right? So she was floridly suicidal, and she hallucinated at some points. She was on major medications, Thorazine and Haldol. I mean, literally rendering her like a zombie. But she'd had many, many, many suicide attempts, so many that we kind of lost count. And we were anxious. We were walking around on eggshells, nervous about when would this be the day that it would happen, or would I be the one to find her? So when she finally did die, it was a shock, but not a surprise. And that night, my dad gathered us all into the living room and, looked at us sternly and said, if anybody asks, this was an accident, which of course is a scary thing to hear. And the takeaway is that this is something to be ashamed of. And he was ashamed, but he was also scared, and reasonably so. He was afraid that my sister would be denied the dignity of a Catholic funeral and burial in our family's cemetery plot. So that put a lot of pressure on us. And, my dad was a wonderful, loving person, but that was the era that we grew up in, and that was the ethos of the day.
Nearly 2 decades later, the family would be rocked again, this time by the suicide of Meg's brother, Danny. She recalls an exchange they had a couple years before his death.
And we were walking along the beach, the shores of beautiful Lake Michigan. And he turned to me and said, sometimes I just don't feel like being alive anymore. I really think it'd be better if I was dead. And I was so shocked by that, and we'd already lost our sister Nancy to suicide. And I was just kind of like I was burned out on the empathy I was needing to exhibit at that time. But I just turned to him and punched him in the arm and told him to shut up. Well, that's not helpful. I mean, later I regretted that, and I did have conversations with them, and ultimately we got him in to see somebody, a professional. But that's really something that we all can do, is to learn how to sit with the discomfort of somebody talking about how unwell they're feeling, and give them space, and give them, without judgment, give them a compassionate ear.
So, knowing what you know now, walking along the beach with your brother, he says that, what would you say?
I'm so sorry. And that's it's understandable. And it's normal. A lot of people feel that way. You're no different than, I'm sorry you're going through that. You can come out on the other side. You're going to feel better. I'm here for you. There's a lot of really good things you can say.
Yeah.
Shut up is not one of them.
We include this exchange in the hopes of comforting you a bit. If you carry any guilt about something you did or didn't say or feel around a loved one who is struggling, and to point out that even if you don't have the training, comfort level, or bandwidth to have a discussion when it comes up, you can often still double back and touch base after you've had a bit of time to process the situation. So you wrote a book, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that every single one of your surviving siblings not only gave you the green light to go ahead and tell their story too,
right,
but you were given access to medical records, police records. You were allowed to interview some of their friends and be the reporter that you are and the sister that you are. That kind of buy-in was fascinating to me because you were reporting on all of your lives.
Right. It was imperative to me that I have their buy-in. Yeah. They were very, very encouraging, and it was, to me, nothing short of heroic for them to have the trust in me that I was going to tell this story the way it needed to be told, which, by the way, meant basically embarrassing all of us. We had to plow through some gut-punching moments in our family, and no one was spared. I mean, everybody was under the hot light and shown in all of their humanity.
Shown in all their humanity. Boy, let that phrase settle in for a minute. Imagine how different the world would be for those of us who live with mental illnesses or mental health conditions if that is how they were understood.
So to me, why this story needed to be told is so that people will feel less alone. I mean, it's a scary and awful thing to go through, losing siblings to suicide, losing a family member to suicide, or growing up in a family with so much mental illness. And so if we can kind of come together, we could take that temperature down and just try to normalize it and have these conversations that are going to be helpful and not meant to throw labels at people and keep people apart, then that's what I was really aiming for.
Well, there's also the aspect when I think of not sharing the story, sometimes even within your own family, right? You're not acknowledging, like, why is dad mercurial?
Right.
There's a name for that.
Right.
It's our medical history. So when we go to the doctor and they say, do you have a history of heart disease? You usually know the answer.
Right.
But when they ask about mental health, sometimes like, I don't know, nobody talks about it.
Well, I have my sister Patty, the one just down from me in line. She is a renowned scientist. I'm very proud of her. And Patty always says, we hunt for symptoms of illness. And this is how we identify these clusters. And this is how we look to find causes and cures, even more importantly, cures. So how the heck are we ever going to get on top of helping people with these big time illnesses of depression, anxiety, schizophrenia? If we don't talk about it, if we're silent about it, then we're not gonna understand it.
So let's talk about the people who don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And the people, whether it's by choice or programming or whatever, or they've been told straight up, like, that's not something to share outside of this. Give it to God.
Yeah.
Let's keep this private stuff in the house.
Right.
Whatever the reason might be.
Right.
How do you recommend that those of us who are silent, dealing with it internally and privately, how do we move forward and heal without, you don't have to write a book, but there's an awful lot of space between those two things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Not everybody's meant to write a book or speak publicly about it. That's just not their style. But it starts with really just acknowledging that mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of. It's very difficult to live with a diagnosis of mental illness, and especially serious mental illness, the biggies, schizophrenia and major depression and bipolar. So those are the lifetime saddle, and we need to respect that. And I think once we come to terms with that and just realize that's who we are, and then not make excuses for it.
Which is a lesson Meg says she learned from her brother Jake, who lives in a group home for people with serious mental illnesses.
He just never apologizes for that. And he never flinches from talking about the struggles that he's up against. He's not standing on the corner announcing it, but he is just very open about it and has really taught me that that's nothing to be ashamed of, and just you are who you are. So I just think if more people kind of took that example and went with it, they'd be better. I think just knowing that you're not alone at all. There's many, many people who are going through what you are, and we're in it together, and stand up for yourself and ask what you need. I really think, Terry, people have such a hard time asking for help.
Oh, yeah.
That Beatles song about in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
Yeah.
I just, that really is, it's just important to know how to be humble and courageous enough to say, I'm having a hard time. I need help.
Gosh, it is so hard to even admit that you need help. I find it even hard to know sometimes when I need help.
Such a good point.
Oh, and we know, you and I know it's important to ask for help. We know that we need help. So does Meg. And it's still hard.
Even if it's something you talk about all the time.
Yeah, you talk about this for a living.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I just want to name that is so cool is that, Meg decided that she wanted to tell her story. And one of the things she says is that it was a little embarrassing for all of them to have the stuff out there. And yet she also named in your interview that it showed her family in all of their humanity.
That phrase, I'm so glad you picked it out. It wasn't all their flaws. It wasn't all their weakness. It was in all their humanity. Yes, that's what it is. It's their humanity. And anybody who's pretending they don't have stuff in their house is pretending.
Yeah. I think terms like authenticity get thrown out a lot these days, but being seen in all of our humanity at the individual level and the family level, it's totally vulnerable. Yeah, it's totally embarrassing. And it's also really powerful. Yeah. It's being seen in all of your humanity seems like it would be the most humiliating thing ever. And I think that that's where some of our brains maybe get stuck. It feels sort of like the emperor has no clothes, maybe. But it's also showing everything that's right about your family, everything that's healthy and powerful. And Meg does such a beautiful job of holding the both and of her family, and the pain and the joy and the humor and the deep connection. Yeah, it just reminds me of how resilient people and families can be when they talk about what's happening. That there is it's a horrifically high limit as to what humans can endure if they can talk about it with the people they love and they're going through it with.
And she's my generation, not yours. That's even more profound to me, because for you to tell your story somewhat openly, it's like, yes, your generation, I'll put in quotes, does more. But I just found it so refreshing. And also, I have to say, her family's story is a lot. Yeah. And I listened to it on an audiobook first, then decided I wanted to interview her. So I read it and I was like, I could only do it in little bits. And I was just reading it, not living it.
Yeah, sometimes when it's your own story, you don't even realize what a punch it can pack to someone who's not used to hearing it, even if, and it's worth saying here, this is not a story of someone who's lived a radically different life. There's a lot of overlap for you, and it's still hard to hear.
Mm-hmm. Maybe more so.
Maybe more so. You know, we've often talked about breaking the stigma sort of, or breaking the cycle sort of one person at a time. And it seems like in her family, they're choosing to do it a generation at a time. And yes, I do think, shout out to millennials, that I do think that some of us are trying generationally, certain generations are trying to say, no, we're gonna talk about it. But yeah, how special after all of that, they decided collectively to do something different is really powerful.
And there was a part of the story, I don't know if I left it in this edit, but when she first wrote about a really tender moment after her sister's suicide, her father was upset that it had been published in a Sunday magazine. And her mother said, Bill, that's how she processes. That Meg needed to do that. So it isn't just her generation. It was, in fact, her parents as well at a certain point.
Wow. That reminds me of how you can like plant a seed and you start to, maybe the seed was planted in the generation above and it was actually able to grow in her generation, allowing really, not just publish it in a newspaper, but publish a whole book.
And I'll say this, but I don't know if I can leave it in, but it is in such stark contrast to my/our family's experience, where one of the reasons I started this was 2 suicides in our family, which I have very explicitly been told not to talk about, even in the context of having a suicide prevention and depression awareness podcast. So it's not an assumption that can be made or a universal truth that, hey, we let people process things the way they need to process it, and this generation or that generation is more comfortable. It's all individual. And I'm just grateful that her family got behind the power of truth.
Yeah. One of the other parts of her story that she shared with you was about saying the quote unquote wrong thing to her brother at a walk along the beach. And I think that those are really important stories for us to hear. She says, like, all we can do is to learn how to sit with the discomfort of somebody talking about how unwell they're feeling and give them space without judgment and give them a compassionate ear. And I think that is so true and so profound and so much easier said than done.
I'm going to jump in because easier said than done, but also easier than what we might think we have to do. Because if we think we have to say the right thing, if we think we have to, suddenly become a psychologist or a whatever specialist in whatever they're feeling or experiencing, shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Don't challenge them. Don't say, but you have so much to be grateful for. Don't say, how could you be sad? Listen to them. And I have now interviewed dozens of attempt survivors and said, like, what would have helped? What would have mattered? What could someone have done? Listened. They could have listened. That's really what I hear over and over and over again. And if we can all learn that's what's needed, that's what helps. And sometimes, you need care. I mean, there can be emergency situations too. But upstream, listen, acknowledge you're feeling what you're feeling and it's real. That might be an easier lift than what we think. And I say that as someone who trained to work on a crisis line and was afraid to pick up the phone. So I totally understand the fear, and I was trained.
Yeah, the stakes feel really high in those moments.
The stakes feel really high. Yeah. And they are sometimes.
I heard this thing that is true in sort of crisis situations like the ones we're talking about, and also not. And it's kind of easy to remember. And so it's something that I want to just offer as a reminder for myself and maybe a reminder to you. I actually think you and I have gotten better at this over the years, which is asking someone, do you want to be heard, helped, or hugged?
Lovely.
And sometimes I'll call and you say, do you want my help and advice, or do you just want me to listen? And sometimes I just want you to listen.
Right.
And unfortunately, we live too far away from me to get a hug. But I think in those moments where we either feel like we put the pressure to say the right thing, really scared about saying the wrong thing, and usually what's happening inside of our bodies is like we're sort of panicking, right? It's this like, what? We're activated that having, first of all, again, an invitation to silence, that also part of hearing is just letting it be quiet after someone shares it. Yes, validation or acknowledgement are hugely important.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And also just like, sometimes I think it doesn't even have to have words.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whoa. I really think breath, nonverbal, I don't think we have to have language for it, that there is just a universal empathy piece. And then,
which would create the space for them to continue to speak to,
yeah,
if they wanted.
Or know that what they said isn't too much for you.
Mm.
So even if that person doesn't keep talking, that you're just there with them. You're just there with them in the quiet, in the heavy, in the feeling. And you're not trying to fix it. And you're not trying to make a joke about it. And you're not telling them to be grateful. You know, all the things you're not doing, it just creates an opening. So heard, helped, or hugged can be really powerful.
It's a good trio.
So thank you so much, Meg, for bringing your joy and your truth and your story again to us and our listeners.
Thanks, Carly.
Thank you, Mom. We really hope that this discussion helps give some language or context to your own depression or ideas for how to support someone else in your life living with it. We invite you to check out the hundreds of episodes in our archive and to explore both the Resource Hub and treatment options on recovery.com. Depression is too dark a road to walk alone.
We'll be back next week.